Thank you so much, Steffi. Indeed, I'm a newbie. I've been wanting to come and be part of DLD for years, so I'm happy, whether serendipity or it was so vague and Laura who introduced me to Steffi, but I'm so happy to have met you because you're a force, you're an inspiration, and it's wonderful to be joining you here today. I'm serving my second term as a member of the European Parliament, and throughout the past 10 years, I have worked on most of the major tech and digital files. But no matter the file, my guiding philosophy has always been the same, that innovation needs to be at the heart of our work as European legislators. I'm a believer in the harnessing of the power of technology for positive change, while at the same time ensuring that innovation aligns harmoniously with our shared democratic values. It is those principles that have guided me throughout the last year and a half of negotiations of the European AI Act. As being one of the draftspersons of that legislation. I have to say that the DLD team has been very generous in allocating more than 15 minutes for my intervention. I have very kindly explained to them that I usually do not try to make lengthy openings, but they have reassured me that the topic is of extreme importance to this audience. So I hope you will find the next perhaps 15 minutes insightful and importantly worth your time. I would begin firstly by outlining some of the current troubles facing Europe's economy today. I'm sure this crowd here is very well familiar with some of them, but I think as a prelude to what the AI Act is doing and the European Union is doing, it's important to know them. Then I will focus on the AI Act itself and how it fits in the broader story of European competitiveness. And in the end, I will give a brief update on where we are, but most importantly, as many of you are quite familiar with it already, I will tell you how I am working actively to shape it into a more positive and into a more balanced direction. In the end, I will outline some of the steps and key takeaways on where we are going to go from here. So to begin, I think we cannot talk about the European legislation without taking a step back and looking at the overall state of the European economy. I don't shy away from being brutally honest and naming the facts as they are, and this is that the EU is lagging behind when it comes to innovation. We do have the brilliant researchers, the creativity, the talent, but we are often not the place where companies decide to scale up or neither to bring their products to a broader market. Why is that? For me, there's several reasons, and few of them I'm going to outline to you now. First of all, it's very important for us to, when we whether legislate, when we want to empower our companies, to look at Europe from the outside. What we do in the Brussels bubble is very much looking towards Europe from the inside. We live in an immense competition faced with global actors like the United States, countries in Asia, but also more recently countries in the Middle East as well. And those global actors have big ambitions. Some of them say they will double their GDP based on innovation. They want to achieve tech dominance. They want to attract companies through low or no taxes. They have massive state support and lots of funding. The second reason is, despite the efforts of many of my colleagues and myself, Europe is still seen a very bureaucratic place both at European and national level. We have one of our biggest assets, and that's the single market, with access to 450 million customers. This is our biggest selling point, but we still have ways to go in making that market truly unified, seamless, and most importantly, breaking down regulatory and administrative barriers. But the last reason is probably what I would like to call the biggest problem for me. Because our culture and history in the past 30, 40 years has made us feel safe. It has made us feel prosperous. It has created some sort of a cozy place for us. We do not promise this to our citizens, but Europe and its member states are in a way obliged to offer very high living standards, the highest possible morale, cultural standards, the highest standards in terms of citizens' rights, democracy, and these are things that we should be proud of. But these are also things that have led us to some extent to be risk-shy societies. And one does not think enough about our future when it comes in terms of competitiveness, doesn't think enough of our economy in terms of how to make it more sustainable and how to make sure that it grows in a steady manner. We as Europeans, in one way or another, are not hungry for the next big thing. We are not motivated enough to become leaders, to become the number one in a certain sector or in a certain endeavor. We do not always feel the global competition that is out there and sometimes can suffocate our economies. And this is why, for me, it's very important that we encourage the entrepreneurial mindset that is essential for fostering innovation. And gatherings such as this one, and I would like to thank DLD, that throughout the years, it has often been the place to help nurture and inspire such a culture. But by saying all this, I know that in a way I'm preaching to the choir here. Many of you are leaders in the fields exactly because you're innovative risk takers. But the question is how to bring that entrepreneurial mindset and drive to other companies, to other regions, to cities, to young people, to societies across the continent. How can we begin to have this societal shift in the way we think, the way we operate, the way we see the future of technology, its positive impact, and what's most importantly going to be Europe's role in that future. For all of that, I think we have to be bold and have ambitious leadership in politics, to be forward-looking and to make sure we craft visionary strategy. And perhaps this, combined together, can lead us to those technological breakthroughs. And in a way, part of the answer is propelling the advancement of AI. AI is indeed a uniquely transformational technology, as we've heard by previous speakers, that will and is already impacting all sectors. It is this type of transformation that fills us both with a promise on one hand and the fear on the other hand. And when it comes to the fear, it is our job as policymakers to address those citizens' concerns, to put rules in place that create societal trust in these technologies. And when it comes to the promise, it is also our job to create an environment in which positive use cases of AI, ones that are in line with our democratic values, ones that contribute to making our lives sustainable, better, can flourish. And the AI Act, I hope and believe, has the potential to calm some of the fears, but also to unleash the promises of AI, but only if we get it right. So this leads me to be a little bit more specific and to explain you where we are right now in the process of the AI Act. Let me go a little bit back and remind you that this legislation was proposed by the European Commission back in April 21. We have been very hard at work in the European Parliament to negotiate the final version of the Parliament's position, and we have done so and adopted it in June. Right now, we are in the final stage of negotiations, where the three institutions, the Council, so the Member States, the Commission, and the Parliament, are discussing how the final text should look like, because we would like to ensure that we finish those negotiations prior to the European elections that are in less than a year for now. If we manage to follow this ambitious timeline, the AI Act would begin to be enforceable around 2026, but the date of enforcement could end up varying depending on the type of company that falls into the different rules of the Act, but also the date itself is still being negotiated. But to put it simply, the months of negotiations ahead are, so to say, the break it or make it moment when it comes to the AI Act and its EU implication. Throughout the negotiations, I have been guided by a set of principles, and for me it's very important to lay them out in front of you, because they are key to unlocking Europe's innovation potential when it comes to artificial intelligence. So I won't bore you too much, but I would like to name a few of them. The first one, which is extremely important, is the need to ensure that this piece of legislation sticks only to the true high-risk use cases that most need to be regulated. There is a difference between regulating an AI system that decides whether a person should get accepted to university or should get a loan at the bank, and an AI system that a company uses to carry out maintenance checks in a factory. We cannot allow ourselves to broadly regulate entire sectors. We should keep the scope of the legislation very limited to critical use cases where an actual risk is present. And for many of you in this room, that might sound like the natural thing to do. But trust me, negotiations on that in the Parliament have been very tough, and they continue to be tough as we continue having those discussions with the two other institutions. The second principle by which I have been guided is, when it comes to the latest wave of generative AI, I say that we cannot be playing whack-a-mole. Instead, we need to be developing an underlying set of principles and mechanisms that are effective regardless of the next big thing that comes around the corner. Why do I say that? Well, I say that because when I sit in some of these negotiations, I sometimes hear colleagues saying, well, ChatGPT is the biggest problem we have to solve, or we need to regulate the metaverse. Well, this is problematic for a number of reasons. For one, I don't think we should be seeing those advancements just as problems, but we should looking at them also as opportunities. But more than that, we cannot make a legislation and a regulation with a single specific application in mind. We should be not focusing on the trends, we should be focusing on producing and having effective guardrails that we can put in place when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to data governance, when it comes to risk management. And the third principle that I have been guided is that we cannot build built-in measures into the AI Act, which we have to specifically promote innovation, we have to build those measures to specifically promote innovation, So we have been very explicit in the European Parliament text that we need to have an exemption when it comes to research and open source. But more than that, I have pushed very hard to have an ambitious approach to regulatory sandboxes here in Europe. Regulatory sandboxes can be physical or virtual areas where companies will have more freedom to experiment with some temporary flexibility on the AI Act rules. One could think, if you especially come from the startup scene, that this has to be a natural or given. Trust me, it wasn't that easy to fight for that, to end up in the European Parliament text. So through regulatory sandboxes, companies will be able to test their AI products, will be able to get guidance from authorities, and bring their product, hopefully, faster to the market with a presumption of conformity with the regulation. And I believe this is one of the key enablers for the smaller players, for the startups, for the scale-ups here in Europe. Don't think that me telling you that these are my guiding principles means that I'm just wearing rosé-colored glasses when I talk about the AI Act. This is not the case. I know very well that there are many outstanding concerns about other areas of the AI Act, but we, from a Parliament perspective, are, aimed at not just reading would like you not just to read the headlines, but also hear more about those potentially more innovation-friendly articles that are out there in the current version. It is, I know they are not attracting the headlines, but the potentially burdensome provision are being worked on, to say the least, at the moment. And an important point here that I would like to stress, it is not one person or one political group that has worked on this text. As many of you are familiar, the result of this text, including some of the parts that seem burdensome provisions for innovation-friendly companies, are a result of a political compromise. I might come from the largest political family in the European Parliament, but trust me, very often in those negotiations, I have been a minority on the principles that I have just outlined at you. So very often, when people give their support and vote in for someone that might have a very good outlook on green policies and issues related to the Green Deal, for example, have in mind that the same person might be working on the AI Act and would not necessarily agree with some of the principles that I've outlined, that I've stood and defended for. So when it comes to criticism, I have shown to be open throughout the process, and again, it's the make it or break it moment. So do come to us. My team and I are open to hear you and to guide you more in more details of the process. Our guiding set of principles was not made by ourselves. We have listened, we have heard, we have informed ourselves in order to come up to those principles which I think are important to provide a balanced text. But with this, I would like to go to a little bit more broader point that I believe goes beyond the AI Act itself, because I think it is not just regulation that will bring the change we want in Europe's tech future. We have to look beyond regulation. We need to look towards instruments that can, on one hand, enhance international cooperation, as I said, looking from the outside, gearing those alliances, and also to have much closer dialogue with industry and other stakeholders. And I have been working immensely on these two parts in order to bring my vision in a more clear principles. On the first point, I think technology is the next front on which the geopolitical race is already being fought. We are very much aware of the panda in the room, and in the ongoing challenges between autocracies and democracies, I think we Europeans need to know who our friends are. So in this sense, I think we need a much stronger cooperation with our American allies, but also other democratic partners. We have to establish those rules not in silos. We have to establish common rules that are based on our common understanding of the world, on our morals, on our ideas about freedom, about human dignity, about democracy. If we leave that to global players such as China, they will do it, trust me, in a very different way. We are natural partners with the democratic world in setting forth a common path for those developments of AI. And in practice, this would mean that we increase our cooperation, whether that's through alliances such as the Tech and Technology Council, whether that's ensuring that our AI Act is in line with the White House voluntary commitments on AI, or through the G7 Hiroshima process. On my second part, the dialogue with industry. I have been very outspoken in the need for closer dialogue between industry and policymakers. Exclamation point here. That's not a given in Brussels. There might be a discussion, but that doesn't mean we hear each other. So I've been pushing for that to happen at a very different level and pace. We cannot determine the technological future without having this close dialogue, without engaging, and also without trusting one another. I have called for the creation of an EU-US TechWise Council, which could be composed of tech leaders, academic experts, policymakers, various stakeholders, because many of those conversations of AI governance are already happening, but again, they're happening in silos. So this TechWise Council would bring together people at the forefront of those changes to exchange best practices, to exchange knowledge, to outline the potential ways for forward cooperation. So these are just some of the ways that through the AI Act, but most importantly beyond, we can make Europe more competitive, more innovation friendly. But I don't think the work has to stop here. I very slightly hinted that we are less than a year from the European election. We are exactly a year away from when the new European Commission will be set up and discussed. So to all of you, I have a big shout out. Let's not be complacent. Let's use this next year to shape the views of those that will be in office in a year, of those that will have the reins at the European institutions, and ask them to put a greater focus on, rather than producing new legislation, putting an emphasis on enforcing existing legislation. We have so many new laws on the table. If I start counting them down and putting acronyms here, we're going to start drowning out of them. So we need to give companies time to adjust. We need to make sure those measures are able to be digested and implemented. So we should focus on the how and not just on the what. I think properly enforced legislation rarely makes headlines, but it's what will be needed to make these digital laws work in a way that they all fit together and that they make sense. Because now sometimes, at least when I talk to industry, they're like, how does this two make sense? So I call it the digital jigsaw. It all has to come to make sense. We also need to focus on new areas that we have under-delivered, such as the Capital Markets Union and the Banking Union. But perhaps, and I'll wrap up shortly, but perhaps the most important area where we need to put our effort, and I've hinted throughout my speech in that, is to be more strategic in our thinking. Policy is not strategy. And if we are able to make sure that the next people in office will understand that, I think we'll be able to truly deliver on more progressive pieces of legislation. I believe one such legislation that we worked on is the CHIPS Act, which aims to the future, not necessarily to fixing an existing problem. So there is a future in which some of those files that we work on now can make our continent more competitive and innovative, but that future is not a given. It is one that we must work towards both through some legislative proposals, but also outside of it through greater international cooperation, close industry dialogue as well. I think we all understand what is at stake. It is the European way of life. That's at least how we call it in Brussels. It is the standard to which we all have become very accustomed, comfortable in a way, and it is a good thing. But in order to sustain it, in order to maintain it, we must continue to be bold, even bolder, to be innovative, more innovative than we've been, and more importantly, to try and lead and gear alliances on a global stage through a clear strategy ahead of us. It's up to all of us, I believe, not just the boring policymakers in Brussels, Berlin, or Paris. It is also up to the broader society, to you here in the room, to industry, to the creative sector, to make all that happen. I am critical, but I am also cautiously optimistic. If we manage to do that vision and create that vision together, probably we'll be more successful in the next couple of years to come. Thank you.